Hello all of you out there, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 most elite Arc Dinos. And first up on the list we have the Caro, and this creature really does just feel premium and elite to me whenever I use it, albeit it isn't the most powerful creature out there, and loads of people prefer the Aloe over this thing. But I'm not really one for the Aloe hype. I don't know why. It is a great creature with a wealth of abilities, and it is a much more powerful creature than the Caro. But I just don't like using it at all, and I have no idea why really. But when I use the Caro, I absolutely love this thing for so many reasons. Namely, its size. This thing is the perfect size for me. It always is the right size for what I need it. Yes, it's not going to be the perfect size for caves, but you always have the baryonyx for that, and a small carnivore kind of makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, as I feel like I can sneak around the place more easily. But I'm not a PvP player, so that isn't really essential to me. And also I do like the speed and the stamina that the Caro has too, which some other carnivores lack. Other carnivores lack, not other carnivores. Well, it depends on the level really. But the Aloe again does have great stamina too, and maybe faster than the Aloe. I don't know why I love the Caro so much. Well, I do know why, but I don't really know why I don't like the Aloe at all. But either way, this thing also does have a really great bleed ability, which works in its favour, and it deals a heck of a lot of damage. It is really worth to get Caro someday, but if you're more of an Aloe person, then go with the Aloe, I guess. But I can never really like that creature, and I don't really know why. Next up, we got the Theory, and this creature has to be included on the list. Like, the Tickling Chicken is one of the most essential harvesting dinos in the game. It just has to be here. It is a great gatherer of fiber, wood, thatch, berries, all of that it is great at. And it is also really great at harvesting meat as well, as it is one of the few herbivores which can actually harvest meat, which kind of doesn't really make sense as it's a herbivore, but you know, we'll just go along with it. Its claws are really ones to be scared about, which isn't really in reference to what I was saying. I don't really know what my trail of thought was there. Either way, its claws are obviously where all of its damage is going to come from, and its saddle is unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
And you know, that Michael Rosen joke is just perfect, and I always have to sneak it in whenever I get the chance with the Theory top 10s. And yeah, the Theory also has another great use on the island. This thing is an extremely useful creature for the dragon boss fight. One which seems like on the surface, why don't you go for a Rex? But when you dive and you analyze that boss fight, you realize it's got a pretty nasty ability that really affects carnivores, but herbivores not so much. Next up, we have the Snow Owl, and this creature just has to be on the list. It has so many great uses that I can't discount it, and it definitely has that very premium feel, and it feels like you're being treated right and on top of the world really. Albeit this isn't the most powerful creature out there, but I don't really get that premium feel out of the most powerful creatures. As with creatures like the Giga, their stamina is abysmal, and I kind of feel like I've been scammed a little bit. The Giga is still a great creature, I'm not saying it's rubbish, I just don't really get any kind of premium feel from it. Whereas the Snow Owl, this creature is just absolutely great when it comes to controlling this thing, which is, in my opinion, an essential part of a creature. If its controls are just awful and feel awful, you're not really going to like using that creature, but it's just so satisfying to glide around and use all of its abilities. For example, that heat-seeking ability. Not too useful for PvE players, unless you're obviously searching for a small tame or a creature which has gone missing of sorts. But on the PvP scenarios, this is a lot more useful, as you can track down some players if they try to raid your base, or if you think they are trying to raid your base. Also, you want to level up loads of stamina on these things, as they heal really quickly, obviously when they have enough stamina, because that's an ability where they have, which you've seen there, they will essentially just freeze all the creatures around them in a radius, and then boom, like that, they heal up, which is actually slightly better than the Daedon's healing ability in some cases, unless there's just loads of enemy creatures around in your near proximity, as you're also going to be healing up those. But if you're healing up a wild creature, which you're trying to tame, as you've just chucked loads of Trank into it, and it's about to die, that's a really useful PvE scenario for it. Now, I talked about the Barry earlier, and the Barry just has to be on this list. This is probably the best caving creature, next to the Shadowman in my opinion. That is another great caving creature, but I still always go back to the Barry, probably mainly for nostalgia reasons, as you could say so many things which are better about the Shadowman than the Baryonyx, especially when it comes to mobility. But still, the Baryonyx is a very mobile creature, and for its day, when it came out, this was it was just the best at caving. And sadly, it's been overtaken by creatures like the Shadowman, but I still use this thing for some reason, because nostalgia's a big thing in my Arc playing. I know I'm not the most efficient player. Some people will get angry at me for that, but I just love the nostalgia around this creature. But it is still definitely a very useful one to this day, which many people use, again, for that caving. But why is it so good for caving? Mainly, obviously, because its size, and the fact that for its size, it deals a really nice amount of damage and has a good enough health stat to keep up with it, as you don't need the biggest health pool for cave runs, as you're probably not going to be in there for that long. And if you press right click too, these things will do a spin attack, which can stun creatures up to the size of the Megalodon, and it is a good shout if you want to do some underwater caves too, due to that ability obviously. Speaking of the Shadowman, we do have the Shadowman next, and I have to put this thing higher than the Barry. Like, I love the Barry so much, but for everything else apart from caving, the Shadowman just has such a premium and elite feel to it. If the Xboxes were to sell the 360 elites again, the Shadowman would definitely be the chosen creature over something like the Baryonyx. Again, its mobility and its controls, they just feel so smooth. Like, just look how high this thing can jump. It's absolutely insane. These things can travel immense distances, and for land creatures, it's insane. And if this came out on Ark the Island in 2015, people would have been so shocked. But you know, Gen 2 is a really OP map, and it isn't just great in the skies as well, it feels amazing in the water too. Don't take that out of context. I plead you not to take that sentence out of context. But their only real downside is obviously the fact that the taming method is absolutely awful, or at least it is to me, but you know, a lot of people agree with that statement. Right, next up we have the Reaper. Obviously the Reaper Queen, no, the Reaper King, not the Reaper Queen. What am I talking about? You can't tame Reaper Queens, you can tame Reaper Kings. But for some reason, I made this bureau with a Reaper Queen. Don't ask why. If you spotted that, well done. You can effectively identify a Reaper Queen apart from a Reaper King. But either way, the point still stands, it is still a Reaper of sorts. Obviously, no Reaper Queen tames, that doesn't exist. Reaper King tames. In terms of their taming method though, it is definitely one which somehow feels premium, even though it is one of the most annoying taming methods in the game probably, and there's so many steps to it. But once you do it, and while you're doing it, you just feel like you're on top of the world, as long as it's going well. If it's going awful, then the premium experience is not there. But once tamed, you really do feel all of the effort that you put in. This creature is so powerful, and it just tears through everything on Arboration, and nothing really can compare to it. And if you want to add a little other Arboration creature as an honorable mention, it's not little, the Karkanos is a pretty elite feeling creature as well, but sadly, obviously, it has not made this list. Now we have the Mwing, and when it comes to travelling, this creature simply has to be put here. Its controls feel so good, and my main claim to fame with this creature is the fact that I have done the Alpha Mwing race mission with this thing, which a beginner Mwynger, if that's the correct verb, Mwynger, it's a verb now, Mwynger, it wouldn't be a verb, what am I talking about? Either way, a beginner Mwynger wouldn't be able to do it on Alpha, probably on Gamma though. That is quite an easy mission to do on Gamma. But in terms of obviously their premium feel, these things feel even more premium due to the level you actually get these things at. And on Gen 2 you can get these things as early as level 19 and use them as early as level 19 because that's when the saddle's unlocked. Obviously you can tame one before then, but you unlock the saddle for this thing before you even unlock Trank arrows, and that's insane. Because every single time I've tamed this thing, I've used Trank arrows, apart from one which I did with the club, so technically that's a lie. Also, they do have a very premium feel when it comes to the milk which they produce, being a portable feeding trough, and it just gets a lot of the hassle away from breeding. And they can gather berries too. It really feels like this creature is just packed with every ability which you could really want out of it. In at number 3 is the RG, and the RG just has to be put in that top 3, as the RG is that creature which I always look to when I go for metal runs, and the premiumness, if that's even a word, over the Pteranodon is insane. In fact, that even sometimes in my gameplay, I won't even go for a Pteranodon, I'll just go straight for this creature if I feel up to taming it, as I usually don't trap these things, as I'm a bit stupid when it comes to taming RGs, so I usually give myself a really horrible time with these creatures, which is sometimes why I struggle to tame these things. It's really stupid. I should just make a trap. They're not that difficult to tame. They really aren't. I wouldn't say they're difficult at all. Just, I like to play Arc the difficult way. Does anyone else do that with RGs as well, or is that just me? Also, in terms of the creatures which they can pick up as well, they can pick up a Wealth, and the Doedicurus and Anki are going to be great pairings with this thing, as they are great gatherers of resources, and it is really the creature which is going to transport you from areas of when you're gathering resources, as it has weight reduction on things like metal, crystal, obsidian, those resources which are obviously, don't know why I can say obviously there, very essential to any Arc player's life in terms of, you know, actually completing the game. They're very useful resources. Also, its saddle actually has a portable smithy, which not many other creatures have, and it has a nice little neat regen ability on top of all of that too. So why don't you just tame the RG? Just tame this thing. In at number 2, we have the Desmodus. And is there any creature which really treats you better than the creature which is in at number 1 on this list? Obviously, this is in at number 2. Well, not really, and that is obviously why it is in at number 2. This creature feels so elite in its form, like nothing really gets better than Desmodus, apart from taking number 1. But in terms of its uses, that Sanguine Elixir is an absolute game changer for doing any kind of taming, as a third of it's done for you, and for official Arc players out there, that is an absolute godsend, and I'm sure you'll be taming these things as quickly as you possibly can. And someone said recently, well, this thing really isn't a great creature because it can't pick up stuff, and I don't really use that out of a flyer, surprisingly, and I prefer all the other abilities this thing has, like gliding, being able to go invisible, not on the Extinction Wastelands as it's never night, don't know why I chose this map, and also just the fact of how cool this creature is to ride around. I don't need that ability, and it doesn't need it at all. And in at number 1 is the Deinonychus, and I just have to put this thing in at the number 1 spot, as its controls feel great, and all of its abilities, which I'll get to in a second, are so good, not even any other Arc creature can actually have the claim to fame ability which this creature wields. Obviously, why it is just such a useful creature. Its first ability, obviously being that it can, obviously, what am I saying? The first ability, sorry, the fact that it can grapple onto creatures and just absolutely tear them to shreds. And that is something which you can't see on any other Arc creature. It has that, and it has even more abilities too. Obviously, it's going to have that pack buff, and the bleed ability that you saw there is going to deal bleed damage, which is great for any carnivore to have. I was going to say essential there. It's not, as not all carnivores have the bleed ability. Doesn't really make sense when you think about it, but it is very nice, and its main claim to fame is it can deal that on bosses too, which no other Arc creature, as far as my knowledge goes, can do. Comment me down below if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's no other creature. Either way, this is one of the best boss creatures out there, and you have to try it, especially with that pack buff. They are great in packs, and with that bleed, man, these creatures are insane. And they're also really good at parkour as well, and their controls feel really nice when you get them right. And I'm not the best Deinonychus parkourer, if that's even the right word for it, as I'm a bit rusty. I haven't really practiced with these things a lot in recent times, but definitely tame yourself a Deinonychus. In at number 10, we have the Spino, and this is a creature which I think is an extremely underrated one, and it often gets forgotten about in most lists of some great Arc carnivores. And I know this isn't a great Arc carnivores list, this is the best late game island tames. Doesn't also mean that they have to be tamed in the late game. I am slightly twisting the definitions around a bit, but there's only really one creature which kind of falls into that slot because it's technically really a mid-game creature. But there are so many creatures you can include on this list, but the Spino, in my opinion, had to be one of them. It is extremely mobile, obviously spawns on the island, that is a requirement for it to be on the best late game, the island Tames. They do have to spawn on the map, and the fact with its mobility that allows it to spin 360 degrees on the spot, like, the Rex couldn't do that. Like, nothing could make the Rex do that. And also, they're really great in the water as well, and they have the hydration buff. And someone said recently that I accidentally said the Spinos had the bleed ability. If I ever said that, I am sorry, I didn't mean it. They do not have the bleed ability, but Rexes don't have the bleed ability either, so, you know. And actually, overall, these things do a little bit more damage than Rexes. And back in the day, like 2016, 2015 arc, they were seen as more powerful than Rexes. Like, this one was just a bigger, more powerful carnivore, whereas the Rexes kind of taken all of the scene nowadays, and these things are pretty much forgotten about. And they can even go on their hind legs too. That was part of the TLC update that they had at some point, allowing them to deal even more damage. And they're really great carnivores, so I simply had to include them on this list. And I really hope that you agree with me on this one. Next up, we've got the Giga, and since this is an extinction, I can't put these things so high on the list, as for the islands you simply don't need this kind of creature, but I have to put it on here. Come on, the best late games of the island in terms of Tames, the Giga, the Tiny Tim, has to be on here. It's an absolute beast, packing loads of damage, but the reason why I say you don't need it is it isn't allowed into boss fights on the island. The Rex is pretty much as powerful as you can get, really, for boss creatures on the island. And I know that's a really, really huge generalization, but, you know, we'll just go along with it. Either way, the Giga can't be allowed into boss fights, so it has no boss use. If this was Extinction, however, I'll put these things so high on the list. Like, man, they are so useful on that map. But they are still useful for gathering resources on the island, like hide and meat and all of that. And they're just really fun to ride on, to be honest. That's another great benefit. They are huge. The only real downsides being their terrible stamina and their rage meter, so it kind of gives them a percentage of their own health, so they don't technically have their true amount of health. Still, I had to include it on the list. Come on, it is the Giga. Next up, following the huge carnivore trend, we have the Argentavis, and this is kind of here for a similar reason. It's a big carnivore that deals a hell of a lot of damage, and it spawns where the Giga would spawn, and it's essentially just the Giga, but a little bit better in my eyes, so that's why it's slightly better on the list. It comes in at the number 8 spot instead of the number 9 spot, but the overall premise of the creature is pretty much the same. Again, big carnivore, deals loads of damage, it does all the same stuff. Yes, it has a blood rage, which allows it to do more damage than the Giga when full, and it doesn't have a rage meter, so it has its full health rather than the percentage of its health. And on top of that, its stamina isn't the most atrocious thing you've ever seen. They are pretty much the same thing, and I'm demonstrating its stamina leveling here, which isn't awful, but don't do that. Don't put all your levels into stamina on this thing. That is not what you want to be doing with this creature. Honestly, don't go near the stamina stat. Just leave it as it is. It is alright. It is fine. It is so much better than the Gigas, but if you really need it, get a stamina mutation. And although I would advise you to tame one of these things on Raasclark, they can still be tamed on the island. I do have a taming guide video if you want to check that out. If I remember, there'll be a card at the top of the video. If not, there'll be nothing. Right, in at number 7, we have got the Rhogther, and I had to put this thing here. Come on, this thing can literally pick up Rexes. It does have to be warranted as one of the best late game the island creatures. And what a late game creature this is. Honestly, it's absurd. Like, it's Tames and all of that. It only spawns on the island under Lost Island, actually. And in normal, I'm still going to call it normal arc, really, because ASA hasn't normalized itself in the arc community. It's pretty much half and half, I think, at the moment, if the numbers are to be right. Because ASA, frankly, is too expensive, and on most things, it doesn't run very well. On the consoles, though, if you do get ASA on a console, you'll be fine with it. It will be a perfect experience for that console, and it will work. But on PC, I'm literally buying a 3090, which at the time of me recording this video is a £650 used card, let alone its price new, just to play a dinosaur game. But thanks to you guys, all of you watching these videos out there, I've actually been able to afford a card like that for my own personal rig. Currently, I still have the 2060 Super in it, but soon, about should be maybe 2 weeks from now, I'll have a 3090 in this thing, and then going on later in the year, I'm going to go for a 3950X and get some more RAM, because 16 gigs isn't really enough anymore, especially for ASA. It does actually recommend 32 gigs of the stuff. Also, if you noticed here, I've been, with the B-roll, I should have said, sorry, cancel my last point there, I've got technology stuff in my mind. Either way, the B-roll there has been showing you how to tame one, which is from my video of how to tame one. Again, if I remember, I will leave a card. If not, there won't be a card there, and you just have to look up Rhogther. But the tame method for the Rhogther is pretty much an exact copy of the Reaper taming method, so if you know that, then you'll be fine. But there's just a couple of extra steps, but it's not too complicated, but definitely is a late game tame because you're going to need a lot of resources for it, especially if you want 100% effectiveness. Next up, we've got the Uranus, and this creature is one of those tames where I just, like, I don't feel right if I have not tamed this thing on the island, and it's so essential for any kind of boss fights. I had to put it on this list. It has to be here, okay? This is the Uranus. It gives that buff to all of your creatures with the courage roar in the boss fight, and paired with a Daedon, it really does work. Although, I found the Daedon isn't the most essential nowadays, and actually I have done quite a few things without the Daedon. I've just paid more attention and put my health into my Rhogters or whatever boss creature I'm using. I admit a Daedon is helpful, so that is why I'm giving it a small mention here, although it is not making this list of the best late game arc tames. And actually, towards the late game, it does become a lot more boss orientated, and you'll see that with the next 4 or so creatures. But actually, the creature in at number 1 is not boss orientated at all, and I wonder if you can guess it. If you do guess it before the number 1 slot, then put a time pin down from when you actually guessed what that creature is. Right, now at number 5 is the Baryonyx. Almost couldn't say 5 there. And luckily, now we have got all my personal life out of the way and all my tech life out of the way. We can now focus more on the dinosaurs, as I'm sure you don't need a full lecture right now on my life story. Either way, the Baryonyx is a pretty easy tame for it to be making this list, and it is the second easiest, I would say, on the list. The creature in at number 1, I'm going to give you another clue there, it is the easiest tame. The second easiest tame is at number 1. It's a very simple knockout tame, spawns in the swamp biome. I think you can find it in some other places as well. Definitely can, not just in the swamp biome, but if you really want to guarantee finding one, just head there. Make sure to avoid swamp fever. Either way, they're the best caving creature on the island, which is why I put them in this list. And they have a right click spin attack which can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon, which makes them pretty useful for underwater caves as well. And I know you can use Sarcos and Basilos and all of that, but for me the Barry does everything, and that is why I use it. Apart from the artifacts of the Skylord, that cave is far too tiny for pretty much any creature to fit in, unless you have a dung beetle for caving for some reason. Next up, we've got the Megatherium, and this is here for the chitin gathering, but mainly because of its insanity against the Broodmother boss fight on the island, and obviously that is why it has made the list, and that is why it is here. It is the best creature on the island for defeating the Broodmother, as it sort of gets a rage buff, you could kind of call it. Not in the case of what the Giga has, or it's very similar to the Carcharodontosaurus's Blood Rage, although doesn't really involve blood, and a sort of alpha buff glow to it, and essentially once it's killed an insect, it will deal absurd damage to just everything, and I think there's a 500-second time or something like that. But considering the Broodmother constantly spawns spider minions at you, pretty stupid of it, I know, they will constantly replenish that buff, so that buff will always be active, and in the presence of a UT buffing them even further, you can have yourself a pretty insane army against insects, as I think it gives them damage, and then obviously some damage reduction on top of that as well. And again, you're going to get a lot of chitin from that Broodmother boss fight, so I guess if you want loads of chitin instead of going to the insect cave, just do the Gamma Broodmother a lot, or you can do the Alpha Broodmother or the Beta one. It doesn't really matter. Any Broodmother stage will work perfectly with this thing. No issues at all. They are the go-to for the Broodmother, which is obviously why I've had to put them on this list. And in a second you'll see what that buff looks like, and you know, maybe you can see what I mean by it looks alpha buff like. In at number 3 we have the Theory, and this creature had to be in here. Firstly because its saddle is unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
I know, that is a very nice one. Obviously makes this thing the perfect arc creature. There is nothing better than it. But the reason for this creature being on the list is firstly its gathering abilities. This thing is insane at gathering all things fiber, wood, thatch, meat, hide, and it can't gather rocks, so I won't bother talking about those. And in my opinion, it's kind of more useful than you say an Anki and a Dodic, but I will give them a small mention here for gathering. They're not on this list, by the way. But the creature unit number 1 is extremely useful with a creature like the Anki and the Dodic. Have you got it yet? Have you not? Either way, the other use for this creature is that it is the best creature on the island for the dragon boss fight. The only downside being it's a herbivore, so for it to heal quickly, you will need sweet vegetable cake. This is where I would say a Aton is very necessary to make sure these things stay alive during the boss fight, as then they can actually heal up quite quickly and effectively, because they don't have the ease of meat. The sweet vegetable cake is particularly expensive, and you probably can't get thousands and thousands of it, just like you would get thousands and thousands of meat. But the reason why they're so good at the dragon boss fight is the dragon has a particular buff or debuff for carnivores with its inflamed fire buff, whereas this thing's a herbivore, so it doesn't get that. In at number 2 we have the Rex, and I had to include this thing on the list. I'm not going to put it in at the number 1. By now you probably should be able to tell where it's in the number 1 spot. Again, comment down that time code once you figured out what the number 1 creature is. But either way, this creature, the Rex obviously, is the go-to creature for any kind of boss fight. Yes, it does have a slight debuff in the dragon boss fight, and it doesn't have the buff the Metheum has in the Broodmother boss fight. It still works for all of them, although I would mainly use it for the Megapithecus because that's the only other one. But actually, nowadays, I kind of tend to use Spinos more for that boss fight because they tend to not fall into the absolute death hole that's there in the arena, which is pretty annoying. But, you know, you can get around it easily with Rexes. It just, they tend to get stuck a little bit more, which is why I don't really like them for that. But there is no denying they are a really great boss creature, and with how easy they are to tame on ASA, it just has to be in at the number 2 spot, and it doesn't. I can't even speak anymore. Either way, it doesn't deserve any less, in my opinion, or any more. But before we get into the number 1 spots, just a quick honorable mentions. The Aloe is a pretty good boss creature. The Megalosaurus does definitely pack a punch as well. Creatures like the Sarco are pretty great water tames, although maybe not in the late game. You could still say they do definitely pack a punch. The Basilo is a great option for underwater caving in the late stages of the game, and a creature like a Thyla is always very nice to hand. But let's get into the tame in at number 1. In at number 1 we have the Argentavis. Have you guessed it now, by the way? 1433 should be the latest that you've guessed what this creature is. Either way, this, in my opinion, is the best arc late game tame for the island. It is just such a useful flyer for travelling from A to B. With Cryopods you can travel with any creatures which you want, and it is always my go-to flyer. And if flyer speed leveling was still a thing, then maybe I would go for a Quetz, but they are so slow, and also I still prefer the Argy in a lot of ways. Although it can't pick up as much as a Quetzal, it is faster than the Quetzal, and it has weight reduction on many resources like metal, crystal, and obsidian, making it a go-to for all of that metal farming. And metal is an essential resource in Arc Ready. To actually complete it, you'll want at least some flat gear, and you'll probably want a pump action shotgun, and obviously metal tools so you can make your gathering process as efficient as possible, and when paired with an Anki and a Dodic, you have yourself an even better creature. And they are so easy to tame, they're suddenly unlocked at level 68. Yes, just one off the perfect level, at least I'm pretty sure it's 68. It's either 68 or 62. It is somewhere in the 60 range, but before level 69, obviously. But yes, in my opinion, the RG is the best. Its saddle also acts as a portable smithy, and it has a really nice regen buff too. You really can't live on the island without an RG in my opinion. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I want to know down in the comments below also when you figured out that the RG was in at number 1 and your favourite late game tame for the island, and did you agree with this list also? And I will see you all later.